The 25th EU-China Summit in Beijing, July 2025, was no ordinary diplomatic event. It was a gathering that drew the eyes of the world, bringing together leaders from two of the most influential regions on the planet. It marked a pivotal moment for two global giants, as European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called it, an inflection point. The summit was not just about diplomacy, it was about setting the tone for future interactions. For the EU, it was a test of unity and resolve, an opportunity to confront China on economic and security grievances and put its de-risking strategy into action. The European leaders aimed to present a united front, emphasizing their collective strength. China, facing economic headwinds, saw the summit as a chance to push back against Western protectionism and urge Europe to act independently of Washington. Chinese officials were keen to showcase their resilience and strategic importance. The world watched closely. Would the EU and China find a path to coexistence, or were they headed for a trade war? The stakes were high and the outcomes uncertain. The issues, trade imbalances, industrial subsidies, Ukraine, Taiwan, were a microcosm of today's global challenges. Each topic represented broader geopolitical tensions and economic uncertainties. Instead of celebrating 50 years of partnership, the summit exposed how much the world had changed. The dynamics of power and influence had shifted dramatically over the decades. The outcome would ripple across capitals worldwide, shaping the future of EU-China relations and global politics. The decisions made here would influence not just bilateral ties, but the global order for years to come. The European delegation was led by Antonio Costa, Ursula von der Leyen, and Kaja Kallas, each representing a tougher, more security-focused EU. Von der Leyen, architect of the de-risking strategy, signaled Europe's intent to challenge China's economic model. Kallas brought the perspective of Eastern Europe, ensuring security and Russia's war in Ukraine were front and center. On the Chinese side, President Xi Jinping's authority dominated, aiming to present China as a partner, not a rival, and to drive a wedge between Europe and the US. Premier Li Qiang handled the technical negotiations, defending China's economic practices and seeking common ground. Together, Xi and Li projected unity, determined to protect China's economic model. The summit was a high-stakes face-off between two visions for the global order. Tension was in the air before the summit even began. Originally planned for Brussels, the event was cut to a single day in Beijing after Xi declined the initial invitation. A clear sign of Beijing's displeasure. The EU arrived with a list of grievances, from trade deficits to coercive practices. China saw Europe as following America's lead. No joint press conference followed. Each side gave separate, conflicting briefings. The lack of a unified message revealed deep divisions on trade, security, and human rights. Talks were described as open and candid, diplomatic code for contentious. Both sides stood firm, with little trust and even less compromise. The summit felt less like negotiation, more like a blunt airing of irreconcilable positions. The summit's economic flashpoint was the EU's new tariffs, up to 45%, on Chinese electric vehicles. This move sent shockwaves through the global auto industry, signaling a new era of trade tensions between two of the world's largest economies. The tariffs, announced after months of investigation, were designed to address what European officials described as an existential threat to their own car makers. Brussels argued these were necessary to counter massive Chinese state subsidies and protect Europe's car industry. European leaders warned that, without intervention, their manufacturers could be overwhelmed by a flood of cheaper, state-backed Chinese vehicles, putting thousands of jobs at risk and undermining decades of industrial progress. China hit back with anti-dumping probes on European pork, dairy, and luxury goods, targeting politically sensitive sectors. These investigations were widely seen as a direct response, aiming to pressure European governments by threatening key exports and the livelihoods of farmers and luxury brands. The tit-for-tat escalation exposed fundamentally different economic philosophies. While Europe champions open markets with rules-based competition, China emphasizes state-led growth and strategic investment in emerging industries. The EU saw Chinese overcapacity and subsidies as distorting global markets. China called the tariffs protectionist and pointed to its own innovation and scale. Both sides insisted their approach was justified, each claiming to defend fair competition and economic sovereignty. Both sides accused the other of hypocrisy, referencing their respective histories of industrial support. The debate grew heated, with each side pointing to past policies and present realities to justify their actions. For Europe, the tariffs were about survival. For China, they were an attack on its rise. Workers on both continents felt the pressure, uncertain about the future of their industries and livelihoods. The dispute deepened the economic rift, with each side blaming the other for undermining fair competition. The rhetoric grew sharper, and the prospect of a wider trade war loomed over global markets. The electric vehicle war became a symbol of the broader struggle for industrial dominance, highlighting the growing divide between East and West, and raising questions about the future of global trade and cooperation. The EU's grievances went far beyond electric vehicles. The trade deficit with China hit a record €305 billion in 2024, which Brussels blamed on China's restrictive practices and market barriers. European firms faced opaque regulations and arbitrary bans, especially in sectors like cosmetics, medical devices, and food. The EU argued that China's state subsidies and industrial overcapacity, now spreading to green tech, were hollowing out Europe's manufacturing base. Data security was another flashpoint. New Chinese laws forced European companies to store sensitive data locally, raising fears of state access and IP theft. For Brussels, these were not just trade issues, but strategic vulnerabilities. The de-risking agenda was about protecting Europe's economic sovereignty in a world of systemic distortions. President Xi Jinping pushed back hard against Europe's complaints, making it clear that China would not accept being singled out for blame in the current global economic climate. He dismissed accusations of unfair trade as little more than Western protectionism, arguing that such claims were designed to shield domestic industries from healthy competition. He warned that imposing tariffs and other barriers would ultimately hurt everyone by disrupting the intricate web of global supply chains that modern economies depend on. Xi argued that China's industrial policies were not unique, but rather legitimate tools for national development. He pointed out that government support for emerging industries is a common practice worldwide, including in the EU and the United States, suggesting that singling out China was unfair and hypocritical. He insisted that Europe's economic woes were largely internal, rooted in structural challenges and policy choices, not caused by China's rise. According to Xi, the EU's recent push for de-risking from China was a strategic mistake that could backfire by limiting opportunities for both sides. Xi urged the EU to resist US pressure and instead pursue its own independent interests. He painted a vision of a multipolar world where China and Europe could work together to address global challenges like climate change, technological innovation, and economic recovery. He framed China as a vital partner, not a threat, emphasizing the benefits of openness, dialogue, and mutual respect over isolation and confrontation. The message was clear. Europe should rise to the challenge and compete on a level playing field, not retreat behind protectionist walls that stifle innovation and growth. Xi's pitch was as much about geopolitics as economics, an invitation for Europe to embrace strategic autonomy and shape its own future in a rapidly changing world. The war in Ukraine loomed large over the summit, exposing the deepest geopolitical rift. The EU demanded China use its influence to help end the war and stop supplying Russia's military-industrial complex. Just before the summit, the EU sanctioned 2 Chinese banks for facilitating trade with Russia, a major escalation. China rejected the accusations, defending its trade with Russia as normal and condemning the sanctions as illegal. For Europe, Russia's invasion was an existential threat. For China, it was a strategic opportunity to counter US influence. The two sides' worldviews clashed irreconcilably on Ukraine. This disagreement overshadowed all other issues, ensuring limited progress elsewhere. The Ukraine divide cemented the summit's atmosphere of deep mistrust. Donald Trump's return to the White House cast a long shadow over the summit. With US reliability in doubt, the EU felt compelled to act more independently, accelerating its de-risking agenda and taking a tougher line with China. The summit was a signal Europe would defend its interests on its own terms, caught between two unpredictable superpowers. For China, Trump's presidency was both a risk and an opportunity, potentially deepening transatlantic rifts and making Europe more open to Beijing. Xi's appeals for European strategic autonomy were calculated to exploit this uncertainty. Both the EU and China were simultaneously negotiating with Washington, creating a complex triangular dynamic. Each side tried to leverage its relationships for maximum advantage. The Trump factor added another layer of tension and maneuvering to an already fraught summit. Despite the confrontational tone, the summit yielded a few small wins. Both sides signed a joint statement on climate action, reaffirming their commitment to the Paris Agreement. They also agreed to streamline rare earth exports to the EU, a practical, if limited, concession from Beijing. But these achievements were overshadowed by the lack of progress on core disputes, trade, security, and Russia. The summit ended in stalemate, with both sides holding firm to their positions. The most significant outcome was simply that dialogue continued, preventing a total diplomatic rupture. The era of optimistic engagement is over. Managed competition is the new normal. The future of EU-China relations will be contentious, transactional, and defined by hard bargaining on every issue.